I didn't think about the complexity and the meaning of seeds until in that moment when these beans ended up in my hands and I grew them out and saved them and shared them. And it really, I mean, with no exaggeration, it changed the whole trajectory of my life.
You're listening to How I Grow This, exploring stories of gardeners from across the globe as we learn from their biggest tips and tricks to some of the things not to do. I'm your host, Luke Hammond. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the How I Grow This podcast. I'm your host, Luke Hammond, and I am super excited to invite Bevin Cohen from Small House Farm onto the podcast today. He has just an incredible breadth of knowledge of so many different spaces, from herbalism to seed preparation to homesteading to living in the woods, just a breadth of knowledge. And I'm really excited to share his story with you today. For those of you who have not yet, smash the like and subscribe button. That always means the world to us. I figured I'd get that out of the way because I always forget right at the beginning of the episode. So, Bevan, welcome to the show.
Hello, Luke. Thank you so much for having me here today.
Awesome. Well, let's dive right into your story. What got you into growing plants? We're just going to say plants because you're into so many different spaces, right?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I've been growing plants, I would say, my whole life. You know, when I was a young boy, I lived with my grandma in an apartment, and we had a little garden on our balcony, right? And I'd grow radishes and that sort of thing. And that was fun and fulfilling for me as a young boy, you know. So I've kind of always gardened, and, you know, we lived next to a large forest growing up as well. So I spent a lot of time out in the woods, learning about wild plants around me too. So in a way, I mean, I've always, I guess, sort of been a bit of a forager as well. Although when you're little, it's just berries, but still, you know, was fascination with all these plants around me. But things really started to unravel for me. It's maybe 15 years ago or so when somebody gifted me a handful of beans from a garden and suggested that I try to grow out these beans and learn how to save my own seeds so I could share them with my friends. And up until that point, you know, I'd gardened, we'd grown things, you know, consistently through all the years, but I'd never even thought about seeds as anything more than just an input. They were just another thing, you know, like you need sun, you need water, you need seeds, you need soil. And I didn't think about the complexity and the meaning of seeds until in that moment when these beans ended up in my hands and I grew them out and saved them and shared them. And it really, I mean, with no exaggeration, it changed the whole trajectory of my life. I saw the garden in a way that I had never seen it before. And it eventually became what we call Small House. Now we bought this farm out here. We bought this little home in the woods, and seed saving has become, it's a daily ritual for us in one way or another, whether we're planting the seeds, saving the seeds, cleaning the seeds, whatever it might be. The seeds have become a really big part of everything that we do in ways that I never would have expected.
Yeah. So 15 years ago, a gift of somebody that was just probably trying to, I don't know, there probably wasn't an agenda there. It was just, Maybe there was. They probably weren't thinking I'm going to inspire this guy to, you know, completely change his life.
No, surely not.
Right? They're just saying, here's some beans, right? Maybe you can consider a garden. And just walk me from that and that kind of like inspiration. Like, what was it that just captured your mind and your passion there?
Well, you know, we could say the most simple thing was growing a plant from seed to seed and seeing that full life cycle was something that I hadn't done before. Typically growing beans, I would have harvested and eaten them when they were young green beans or something, right? So I never even saw the seed get produced necessarily or realized that I had when I did. I just wasn't aware of that. But so the instructions when the seeds were handed to me were, take these seeds home, grow them in your garden, save your seeds, share them with your friends. So those were the 4 steps I tried to follow. And it was the 4th step that was really the game changer for me. Because of who I am, I can't just do things simply. I have to probably do things over the top every time. So instead of just sharing seeds with my friends, I said, let's put together a seed swap. I'd never been to a seed swap before at that point in my life, but I'd seen them online, and so let's give it a go. Let's see what we can do. And so we threw together this little event, and we had it in the basement of a local art gallery. and like 100 people showed up to this thing. People I didn't know who they were, word of mouth. Just people just showed up to swap seeds with us. And I gave everybody these beans and just like I was supposed to. And it was great times. And I thought, mission accomplished. That's it for me. But it was the next year we decided to host that seed swap again. And people came back with the beans that they had saved from their garden. And that was really what triggered it for me, Luke. It was like that handful of beans could become 100 beans. A handful of seed savers could become 100 seed savers. And all we had to do was
Wow.
spend time together sharing seeds. And that was it. That was like that light bulb moment where I said, this is where I'm going next.
Right. And so you were, as a career, or you were not on this career path of seed saving, sharing your story, internet entrepreneur. Where were you directly going?
Yeah. So, okay. It all, is serendipitous in its own way. We'll rewind back in time. I used to organize a music festival. And so that was and that's where I thought that I could translate into a seed swap. I could organize a music festival. I could do a seed swap, right? So I used to do this music festival, and the music festival was very, very successful. And we had, different sponsors. And one of the sponsors was an insurance company. And they said, we love what you're doing here. Would you come do marketing for our insurance company? And I thought, well, sure, whatever. I was young. I didn't have a lot of direction. I was like, I'll do that. And there's no soul in that for me. That wasn't really the proper direction for me to go. And it didn't take me long to realize that I wasn't going the path that I wanted. So I had quit my job and bought the farm here, and kind of with no plan for what was going to happen next. And it was that same year that somebody gifted me those beans. So it all just happened.
Right.
There was no plan for it, but I just had to get away from the office. Yeah, you got to tuck your shirt in, all these things. It wasn't for me. I had to be outside more. And so it just really none of it was intentional. That's always what I joke, the best things that we've ever done here at Small House is when I get out of the way and just let nature do its thing. That's been the lesson over and over for sure.
Awesome. Well, one of the things that we talk about so deeply here at the How I Grow This podcast is context. We see a lot of things online where people may be teaching a methodology or a system, and people try and adapt those systems in contexts that don't match. For example, growing in Canada versus growing in Phoenix, Arizona. Heats change, humidity, climate, all that stuff. And so people try to match timing. So we want to always clarify context. Walk me through some of the context of your farm, your maybe growing zone or climate, first frost, last frost, snowfall, that kind of thing.
Sure. So we are in central Michigan is where we're located. And we forever have been zone 5B until recently when the USDA updated the map to reflect, changes in climate due to, the world we live in. And now we're 6A technically, but I don't know. So central Michigan, our specific location, we're tucked into the woods. So for us, our very specific context is sun is a commodity that we don't have a lot of. So we really have to work with what are our priorities, what's going to get that full sun space, what can we grow in partial shade. So we're always trying to find that perfect balance of the different crops that we're going to grow here. Frost dates vary. So I would say towards the end of March is probably our last frost, and our first frost comes about mid-October. But that varies dramatically. The weather is so unpredictable anymore. Last year, I don't think we had our first frost until into November. One year we had a frost September 15th, which was devastating. So that is hard to predict, but on average into March, mid-October, and we get quite a bit of snow. Not as much as we used to. Even in the years that we've been here, you can see a difference in the quantity of snow that we get. It seems to be less and less. But we get decent snow. We got plenty of snow out there right now, which I appreciate. You got to look at the bright side of things. That snow is bringing a lot more, minerals back into the soil. It's replenishing my soil. It's doing the work that nature's meant to do out there. So as much as I don't enjoy shoveling all that snow, I do know that it's beneficial in the big picture, right?
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the sunlight thing. You're verging on a longer day season because you're further north than a lot of growers, but you still have challenges with sunlight. Is that because in the summer the woods are so thick and full, and you just don't have a lot of pasture, like open areas for that sun to kind of penetrate through, and so your early morning sun um, isn't as direct, or what is that?
That's exactly what the situation is. We're surrounded on all sides by forest. So, over the years, we've kind of pushed the woods back a little bit, trying to open up our space. But, we've got some areas in the center of our space that are full sun all the time, and they're fantastic. But all along the edges, they kind of rotate depending on the time of year, so they're mostly partial sun and that sort of thing. But we've really learned how to work with that over the years and kind of change the crops that we grow. Like when we first came here, I wanted to grow a lot of corn. I like corn. I like growing corn. I like growing corn more than I like eating corn. I really enjoy the process of a corn's life cycle very much, but I mean, it takes up a lot of space and it requires that sun. So over the years, we've kind of faded that out to make room for more tomatoes, which makes everybody happier anyways. I mean, gosh, I live in the Midwest. I don't need to grow corn. What do I need corn for? There's corn and I can go in any direction and get all the corn I would ever need. There's popcorn guy down this way, there's sweet corn guy that way. So I've learned to build relationships with the people in my community to supplement the things that we can't necessarily grow here.
Very cool. Very cool. So, would you say that you guys have kind of like a big breadth of focus? You're both kind of farm and homestead, and kind of seed saver exchange kind of meets internet entrepreneur. Like, talk to me a little bit about all the things that you have going on your homestead and kind of your points of focus, if we can call it that.
Yeah, that's a good one. A point of focus. This is the thing that we talk about all the time around here is what's the focus, because we do so many different things. So in the spring and in the fall, I spend a lot of time on the road now. I travel, I speak at a lot of events. I do a lot of in-person conferences and workshops and those sorts of things. So I spend a lot of time doing that. And in the wintertime, I spend a lot of time writing. So we have published, I don't know, 10 or 12 books, something like that, since we've been here. So almost every year we've been able to come out with a different book about something that we have going on here, from simple gardening to oil pressing. We do a lot of oil pressing is a big thing here, herbalism, seed saving. So books of many topics. My wife, Heather, she handles all of the digital world. So if you visit us on YouTube or Instagram, or if you join our Patreon, all those sorts of things, she's managing all of that. So she's kind of the interface with, well, the internet. That's not really my forte. We have a lot of gardens here. We grow a lot of herbs and food and seeds. It's hard to pick a focus. What I look at here is, we don't have like necessarily a niche that we specialize in. We're very broad and general in what we do because the reality of my existence is broad and general. I have to grow food. I have to save seeds to grow that food. We need the herbs for our food and medicine. I have to save the seeds for that. I want to teach people how they can do these things for themselves. So there's a lot of things going on here, but to me, it's a very holistic way of living. It's really, that's the reality of it. I can't imagine just doing one thing and having that be my existence.
And I wholeheartedly agree. I think that's the one thing. I don't just like one flavor of food. I
Right.
I like eating a lot of diversity, and I don't just want the one thing. Um, I think one of the things that I think is so cool about what you do, and you take a not a simple plant, because there's no such thing as a simple plant, but you take a plant and you kind of um expound it out and far out and use it as far as you can. From, not only do you eat the tomato, but you're saving the seed, but you're canning the tomato. That would be the tomato example, or even more. But one of the things that I'm seeing you do is the vast expanse of things you're doing with herbs. Um, if we can spend a couple minutes just talking about some of the the depth and breadth of a single plant and its uses, and I think as home gardeners we kind of miss that, right? We initially.
Initially, sure. It's all about that spending time out there and observing these things and taking the time to build that relationship and see all of the different things that are happening out there. But you could think of a plant and it's going to do many things for us. Like simply, we could think about an herb that brings flavor to our food, and that's delicious, right? Let's say, I don't know, oregano. We could grow oregano, and that's going to be fantastic for flavor. There's also a medicinal benefit to that. So then we can harness that, and we can think about the many different ways that we could use oregano, whether it's internally or topically, for its healing benefits or its beautifying qualities. It's really nice for your hair or whatever it might be. But then we can think about the role that these plants are going to play in the garden. Some of these herbs can also be cover crops. Some of these things are keeping roots in the soil. Some of them can become green manure. Some of them can become, nutrients for our chickens, right? There's just so many different ways that this one plant can offer us so much. So really, when I teach people about herbs, herbalism, gardening, whatever it is, the essence of all of the things that we do is that relationship, is developing a relationship with the plants, or seeing the relationship that plants have with each other, or the relationship that plants have with the soil. And it's just understanding and nourishing these particular relationships. That's all gardening is. That's all everything in your whole life is, right? Is just these relationships. So ultimately, I just try to inspire people to look at these plants from a different point of view. Last year, we published a book with Timber Press. It's called Herbs in Every Season. And it was one of the most, for me, it was one of the greatest projects that we've ever been involved in, because it forced me to observe these herbs through the seasons so I could write about the way that the plants change through the year, the way that our needs for the plants change throughout the year, and how those needs, they're in lockstep. As the plants change, we change, and our needs change, and the plants are there offering us the things that we need as they change. And it was absolutely fascinating for me to sit down and spend that time over many seasons observing these plants that just grow around me, and learning to appreciate all of them. Even, the most stubborn weed, quote unquote, is an incredibly beneficial plant if we just learn to look at it from the right point of view, right?
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit about some of the things that you witnessed at like another level within that exercise of doing that book, particularly like within the interactions and the relationships that you were witnessing.
Sure. Well, I mean, let's think about something like, I don't know, dandelion. Okay, so dandelion, because I said stubborn weed, so let's just talk about a dandelion, which is a plant that I love very much and that I think that everybody should learn to appreciate. So when we come into the spring, we spent most of our winter eating very rich foods, lots of meat, salty foods, lots of treats throughout the holidays, whatever it might be. We don't necessarily take care of ourselves the way that we probably should have, because we're celebrating. We're indoors. We're more stationary, whatever it might be. And as spring approaches, these dandelions come to life, and they offer us these bitter greens that are going to stimulate our digestive system, right? They're going to kickstart us. They're going to ramp us up and give us the energy that we need to survive early in the spring. Exactly what we need to kind of reset after a long, rich food diet of winter. Okay, and then we move into summertime. Now we're out in the garden. We're working all the time. We're doing a lot of weeding. We're doing a lot of hoeing. We're doing whatever in the world it is that brings us joy in the summertime. And it's probably going to make us tired. We're probably going to have sore muscles. We're probably going to be, our back might hurt a little bit. Well, what do you know? The dandelion flowers are analgesic. That means they're good for pain relief. We can harvest these dandelion flowers, infuse them into oil, turn it into a wonderful massage oil that's going to help ease and soothe these tired, sore muscles that we have, right? Now fall approaches. Now the plant itself has become dormant. It's giving us a signal that it's time for ourselves to start becoming dormant as well, right? Just by observing nature, we can learn a lot of things about our own behavior. But the dandelion's going to become dormant. It's putting all of its energy down into its root system. Well, that's when we're going to harvest those roots. And we can dry them. We could brew them into like a coffee type drink if we like, but I also like to extract them in alcohol, turn it into a tincture. Now, a dandelion root tincture is one of the most nourishing things that we could possibly have, right? It's going to be very beneficial for our gallbladder and our liver. And these are two organs that they process all the toxins that we encounter. So all the toxins that we've encountered throughout the season, right? Whether it's the air, the water, the food, whatever it may be, right? This herb is there to help cleanse us and to prepare us for this dormant season that's about to come, this rest and reflection. So throughout these seasons, of the year, what we need was going to change, and what the plant provides for us changes. The part of the plant we harvest changes, the thing that it's going to do for our body changes, but they're in step with each other exactly when we need them.
Man, that is a powerful like seasonal image, as you described that, of just kind of the cyclical world that we live in, the way that you're living in conjunction to the different parts of the plant. I love that. You talked a little bit about tinctures and extraction. That is one of the most like common like things right now. It's an internet buzz of extracting whatever medicinal benefits are from these herbs. Can you describe that process for listeners who may not know what an extraction is? How it's actually, what is it actually doing? How is it pulling good stuff out of this thing?
This is a good question. This is funny. We also host a podcast. I'm going to do a quick plug right here. We have a little podcast. It's called Seeds and Weeds. And that's what we do with our life, is seeds and weeds, right? And the episode that's coming out real soon to right now, so it'll definitely be out whenever this airs, is all about herbal extracts. So trying to really dig into these different methodologies and the science behind it. But very briefly, we can get into it. So the most common extracts are going to be a water extract, an oil extract, let's say alcohol extract, vinegar would be another option here. And so what's happening, let's start with the water extract, because that's the easiest. You can think of a cup of tea is a great example of a water extract. So what's happening here is when we expose the plant material to the water is acting as a solvent. And what it's doing is it's extracting, it's pulling out, it's removing the water-soluble chemicals from the plant material. So it breaks down that plant material, invades the cellular wall, and pulls out the water-soluble compounds. And you can see it. You make a cup of tea, you pour the hot water on the tea bag, boom, colors start to come out, the aromas of the herbs. These are the signals that the water-soluble chemicals are being pulled out of the plant. If we move on to an oil extract, like I talked about with the dandelion flower, now essentially this is fat soluble. We're extracting the fat-soluble compounds. And often in modern herbalism, you'll see people using plant-based oils, so like seed and nut oils, right? Which is, we press those here at the farm, so we use a lot of those: sunflower oil, hemp seed oil, etc. But any sort of fat would work here. Indigenous North Americans would often utilize animal fat. I have a friend in northern Michigan, an indigenous fellow. He still utilizes the same technique, and I mean, thousands of people probably still do, right? He uses bear fat, and it's the fat that extracts the fat-soluble chemicals from the plant. You could use butter, you could use milk, any sort of fat-based compound.
Does that have to be extracted through heat? Is that how that process? That's just incorporating that into the fat itself.
Into the fat itself. Yep. So now we'll often see people utilizing heat. So we'll heat up that oil, or we'll heat up the water when we make tea. What the heat does is it expedites the extraction. So it speeds up the process. So we can accomplish an extraction much faster, but you don't have to heat it at all. When we make herb-infused oil, we don't utilize heat. Oil, being mostly fat, is sensitive to heat anyways, so we don't want to overheat it. So we will pack the dried herbs into a jar and fill it with oil, and we'll put it away and let it steep for like 4 to 6 weeks. It's a long process to get that out there. But with alcohol, same thing, no heat. Now this time we're extracting alcohol soluble compounds, right? You can see it's like a pattern over and over again. What's the most interesting about this? Some chemicals are water soluble, they're fat soluble. Most everything in a plant is alcohol soluble. So these tinctures are very, very potent. They're very strong, which is why you always see them in a small bottle. They're measured by the drop. Very strong stuff. You could compare this, everybody's going to know this one, vanilla extract that you're going to use in your kitchen. That's all that is. It's vanilla beans and alcohol, right? And when you're making something that uses vanilla extract, you're only using a little bit, quarter teaspoon or something, right? Because it's very, very strong, and you don't want to overpower your cooking. It's the exact same type of concept. Alcohol soluble chemicals are being pulled out of the plant material, extracted from the plant material by our solvent. That's all that is.
Mm-hmm. Now, I think there's a few other ones there as well, like glycerin or glycerides that do that extraction. Is that the same as an alcohol extraction? Only a slower process?
Well, it's yes and no, So some people are going to utilize a glycerin style extraction to make a product like a tincture. but without the alcohol in it. And some people that want to avoid the use of alcohol are going to lean on these glycerin style extractions, but you'll find that they're not quite as potent as an alcohol base. They don't quite have the same shelf life because the alcohol works, really well as a preservative here. But it's similar in a way, just a slightly bit different process. We do a lot of vinegar extracts here. And with the vinegar, it's actually the acidity of the vinegar that's going to help pull like minerals out of the plant. So if we're really looking to extract minerals in particular, let's say stinging nettles, parsley would be another good example. We can use the vinegar and really get the nutritional benefit as well as that flavor, a really powerful extraction that way.
So I think one of the bigger challenges, like we've just gone all the way into the depth of like herbalism right here. So I love it.
Right.
Um, for somebody who's interested in this and they're wanting to learn more, there's a lot of information out there, some good, some not as good. Um, how do you figure out the formulations, and how do you test whether or not this is good advice or bad advice? And then let's just start
Yeah,
there.
yeah, yeah. That's a big question. Yeah, okay. So there is this on the internet. There's this thing where there's like so much great information, and like you said, there's so much not great information, and it is almost impossible to tell what is what just by looking at it, especially if you don't know it, you don't know what you're looking for. So I always, I'm an old fashioned kind of guy. I like personal interactions with people.
Yeah.
So if you can find somebody in your community that is working with herbs and you can work in their shadow, that's the best thing that you can do. If you can find books that are recommended by people that know what they're talking about, that's the second best thing that you can do. There's there's a number of herbal academies online. There's the Herb Society of America. There's these different organizations, and they vet all of the information that they share. So you can go to these places and you can find recommendations for educators or recommendations for books or whatever it might be. But there's nothing better than that interpersonal experience of finding somebody that knows and spending time with them and trying to learn from them. That's the absolute best. Not everybody has that option necessarily, because wherever they live or whatever it might be. Turning to some of these online resources that, the Herbal Academy is a great place to start looking for resources, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, along the same lines, the whole purpose of making anything like this or utilizing uh, these recipes is to use it.
Yes.
How do you know uh, how much to use or how to apply or when to apply? Um, I think it was uh, several years ago. I think almost a decade. It was well over a decade ago. Joel Salatin actually sat me down. We were talking about the health of animals and just the bell curve of health. And some people have heard this is, once you get to health, anything you do is actually potentially going to pull you the other direction and back down to unhealth. And so there is a bell curve within this zone of okay, how do I stay at the peak of the bell curve?
Yeah.
In regards to this, and within herbalism, I think the natural thing is, well, it's natural. Let's just let's go.
Well, yeah, you're right. And we may think sometimes we'll consider a plant, it's harmless. Oh, this plant can't hurt me. What? It's just a plant. But plants can definitely take you out. That is a fact. So I think at the essence of this answer, I'm going to say, of course, is this concept of relationship. Right? Having this relationship with these plants. We shouldn't just willy-nilly go out and harvest a bunch of plants and eat them or extract them in alcohol and drink it. Right? That would be, foolish. You really want to take the time to understand the nuances of each individual plant before you ever try to make it into medicine. Spend some time getting to know it. When I teach people like the very basics, we do a little program that's kind of like sort of the basics of herbal extracts. And I start with the water extract. We move into the oil extract. We talk about tinctures at the end. And I frame it in this particular way because it's the easiest entry point is tea. spending time
Mm.
with these herbs, drinking tea. And for the most part, that's pretty harmless for people, right? It's very difficult to overdo it with a cup of tea, right? A couple cups of tea, you're going to be okay. And then we're going to move into topical applications for these plants well before we get into these potent, ingested alcohol extracts. Before you ever make a tincture, you should be very, very familiar with all of the ins and outs of this plant, before you're consuming it in that way. So I think that it's like, we want to rush into everything and we want instant results and all that sort of thing, but that's just not a good idea. That's never a good idea. I don't think in any application is that a smart move. And in this place where we're eating things or drinking things,
Yeah.
definitely not. Right. So
Yeah.
I always tell people too, it's better to know like 12 uses for one plant than one use for 12 plants, right? One
Right.
plant can do so much for us. So pick a plant, whether it's like something in your spice rack, something you like to garden, a weed that shows up in your yard, whatever it is, pick that one plant and get to know everything about it. Everything about it. It's medicinal compound, sure. It's flavor compound, sure. But learn about its life cycle. Learn how it grows. Where does it grow? Why does it grow? How does it make seeds? Everything about that plant until you're like basically an expert on that plant. Then move on to a new one, right? We don't need to know everything about everything. There's just, that's not necessary. But get to know about the things that are relevant to you. Get to know about the things that are growing in your backyard. That's a great place to get started.
Yeah. I think about that of the water extract and teas, and for the most part, it's fairly safe. But I've drank some tea before where it's like, man, this screwed up my sleep. That like I feel like my equilibrium's thrown off. Like I'm not like in it's just like, what did that do to me? Like that my body reacted to whatever was in this tea. Um,
Yeah,
so
well,
I
it could happen. So I like to tell people, obviously the most important tool for all of us to have is a notebook. We need
uh-huh.
to be writing all these experiences down, writing down, taking notes of all these experiences so we can come back to it. Maybe we can identify patterns. Maybe we can see plants. Sometimes what we might find ourselves is if we're drinking blends of herbs. And this can be
Uh-huh.
the place where it gets confusing is if you drink a blend of herbs and it makes you feel, not so good, or it makes you feel like really good or whatever it is, you don't even know what plant it was in that blend that did it to you, right? So again, it's that relationship. It's understanding each of these herbs on an individual basis before you start combining them together and giving it the old chug a lug.
Wow,
You got to
that's
get to
so
know it.
good. That's so good. Now, one of the things that is kind of talked about, and this is along the same vein, is the use of drinking teas to combat allergies and the amount of plant allergies that are out there. There's a lot of folks that struggle with a lot of different allergies. I know one of the ones that you guys sell in different combinations is like juniper. Um, Depending on where you're at, a lot of people struggle with junipers or cedars, um, and many of those evergreens. If they were trying to dabble into that, figuring out, I don't know if that's exposure therapy. Like people say you can drink local or eat local honey, and it really helps with allergies because the pollen has been processed through the bee system, and all those kinds of layers. Have you experienced this or seen this really make a difference in the world of allergies?
Well, sometimes. So I'm a big proponent of stinging nettles, Urtica dioica, and I recommend it for all sorts of different things. And I have found over the years a number of people that have purchased it from us to make tea with have come back and reported that they've had great results with their seasonal allergies. That drinking this nettles tea seems to really help with the allergies. Now, it's not making them so they're not allergic to it by any means, but it's helping with the symptoms that they feel through the allergy, right? So it's helping them work
Mm,
through the allergy symptoms. It's not obviously going to cure their allergy, but it just helps to negate the issues that they might feel from it. But people, and it seems like more and more I come across people that are allergic to something. Everybody seems to be
uh-huh.
allergic to something anymore, whether it's chamomile or peanuts or who knows what it might be. So it is something where we want to be cautious and careful again before we drink a plant that for some person This is totally harmless. I could drink chamomile tea all day long. I'm going to be super chill, but aside from that, it's not going to have much of an effect on me necessarily. But somebody that's allergic to chamomile isn't going to have that same benefit, right? And you don't want to necessarily find out that you're allergic to chamomile after you just drank a whole gallon of it or something. That's not a good way to find out. So starting off small, it's like doing a spot test. Like when you're cleaning the carpet, you got a thing, and you spot test a certain spot to make sure, it's not going to have an adverse reaction. It's the same thing, small amounts, see how you feel about it. And not to sound like a broken record, but wouldn't that be part of that developing that relationship with the plant, is getting to know how you feel? That's one of the interesting things about herbs, is that there's some generalities most certainly, but everybody's a little different, and everybody's going to react to herbal medicine a little bit differently. Some medicines might be more effective than they are for other people, right? Everybody's very unique. So even though we can say, generally speaking, this herb may be good for this or that, that's not really how we deal with herbal medicine. It's a very unique one-on-one experience for everybody.
Yeah. Let's zoom back out and let's kind of zoom in to describe your garden to us, and kind of how what are the kinds of systems that you may have in place for irrigation? Are you focusing on a lot of perennials? Are you doing a lot of annuals? Do you have multiple gardens set up all over the place? Let's just zero in on your guys' garden.
Yeah, it's a big mess. There's a lot of different things going on out there. So we have got one area back behind the pole barn here that's an in-ground, tilled up, big space. You know what I mean? And we do a lot of row crop annuals out there. We water that. We've got off the pole barn, we have a water catchment system. I got it's like a 250 gallon tank on each end. We catch the water off of that. We can drip line irrigation. Super easy to do because everything back here is growing in rows. So that's not a problem at all. That's mostly annuals. Thinking about it right now, there's a few comfrey plants, a couple random fennels that we keep out there as perennials, kind of marking corners and things. But aside from that, it's all annual row crops, tomatoes, lettuce, whatever it might be each year. And then we've got a big native garden over here. We had an oak tree that we had to bring down, and it opened up a lot of sun, so that was nice, but it also left this big stump there. So we were trying to find a way to beautify that. So my wife came up with this idea, and we tilled essentially a big kind of circle-ish shape around it and filled it with native flowers. And it's gorgeous. It is so beautiful.
That's awesome.
Oh yeah, it's really neat. And it brings in all these butterflies and hummingbirds and all these little buzzy buddies keep coming around. We have more activity. You can see the difference in the insect and animal activity out here just because we've installed this garden. It was absolutely amazing. So it's just loaded with native perennials, and they kind of compete with each other. And, some years, some plants seem to do better than others, and it's just doing its own thing, and that's fine. Then we've got a number of raised beds, many, many raised beds. There's a guy not far from us that mills his own lumber. So we get wood from him. And so every year we build a few more raised beds. So we've got a whole raised bed grid going on out there. That's mostly annuals. I think we do a lot of annuals out there. And then around the house, we've done a lot of landscaping, you could call it, but it's mostly herbs and edible plants and that sort of thing. Perennials, again, in gardens around the home. So we have a little bit of everything. And then our sunniest places on our whole property are our deck and our driveway. So we do a lot of stuff in containers as well to make use of that full sun. So we have lots, 100 or plus sometimes, containers that we grow. I'll often just use like 5-gallon buckets, and I'll drill holes in the bottom of them for drainage, and bada bing, they become containers for tomatoes or whatever it might be. So we're doing a little bit of everything. We got in-ground, we got raised beds, we got containers, we got natives, we got perennials, we got annuals. It's a big smorgasbord of different things happening all the time. It's
very cool.
Yeah, it's a lot.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Let's talk a little bit about raised beds and how you're choosing to fill these raised beds, and maybe some fertility around either raised beds or even these other gardens that are a little more wild and natural.
Yes. So we have chickens. So the chickens give us many gifts, some of which being incredible fertilizer, so we can compost that. We run it through the compost system. We've got quite a elaborate multiple bins, multiple space compost situation going on over there. So we produce a lot of compost, kitchen scraps, yard waste, recycled plants, whatever it might be. Straw, lots of straw. So we got that going on. With the raised beds, we got really lucky. This last batch of raised beds that we built, we did half dozen, 8 of them, maybe the last time we built them last year. And the utility company had just come through before that to clear out under the power lines near us. So they bring this big wood chipping machine thing and they just shot and then just leave the whole mess, you know? So that was awesome. So we went and collected a whole bunch of it. It was just small bits of wood, tons of wood. So we filled the raised beds up halfway or so with this chopped up wood. So it's kind of like a Hugo culture almost that we did in these raised beds. So we're able to get that wood in there, and that's really nice because that wood holds so much moisture, and as it breaks down, it's going to feed the soil. You can see as the level of the soil will move down a little bit, but we just fill it in with compost as we go. In the bigger spaces, like in the row garden and stuff back there, I'll grow like winter wheat or winter rye as like a green manure, and then I'll till that in, come spring or whatever it might be. And that seems to work out there pretty well. But so each area has kind of got its own little system that we have to have in place for it because the way that we treat the raised beds is obviously different than we treat in ground. And then the containers, we're kind of mixing new soil for those every year. And so if we specialized in one thing, we could probably scale that up to be more practical. But for the situation that we have, we kind of have to do a lot of different things to make it work. So that means, each method has its own chore that comes with it.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
know.
Let's talk a little bit about the differences between managing your raised beds versus managing the in-ground. What are some of the pros and cons that you've seen for both systems?
Well, the in-ground is the easiest by far, I think, because I can grow. I grow the rye in there. I could till it in. The making the rows is really nice. It's really easy to maintain the rows. You know what I mean for weeding. We'll mulch it pretty good sometimes to cut down on the weeding. Or I let the weeds grow in the rows, and then I got this little electric weed whacker I'll take out there, and I literally just weed whack the weeds down the rows, and they become their own layer of mulch. So nature's kind of just doing the work for me out there. That's really nice. It's, everything's in a straight line, so it's just very efficient, I feel. Whereas the raised beds, I don't quite have those benefits. But one of the benefits of the raised bed, I suppose, is the weeds. There's no weeds. I don't have any weeds. I put the plants in, I mulch it. There's no weeds coming up. Occasionally, you'll get a little grass will pop through, or some lamb's quarters or something or whatever. And who's even mad about that? I'll take the lamb's quarters and take them in the kitchen anyways. So I'm not even. That's like a bonus. So the less maintenance throughout the season with the raised beds. Once I have them established for the year and I've got the plants in and I've got it mulched, I don't have to worry about it. We got some irrigation line stuff that we bought where it's essentially a bunch of components and you can kind of shape the irrigation lines in any ways that you want. So I kind of make like a spider looking thing and I'll lay that down before we put the mulch in. So, watering is a snap, that's really nice. So ultimately the raised beds, I can't overwinter plants as well in them. And we overwinter a number of biennials here for seed production. And the raised beds, and it's just simply from being up off the ground, they're more susceptible to the changes in temperature. They get colder a lot faster there than in the ground. So for overwintering for seed production, I have to do a lot of that in the ground in the back. And then that kind of becomes a pain because, again, sun's a commodity here. And when I'm overwintering crops and now they have to be here for 2 seasons, that can become very inconvenient sometimes as far as what I wanted to do in that space in the spring. So there's a lot of planning and diagramming that has to take place to make that work. I've learned one of the lessons I learned in the first couple seasons is I am not going to remember any of this. I won't remember what plants are where by any means. So we draw a lot of maps. We have a whole garden journal where I keep track of a lot of stuff like that to help me remember where these overwintered plants are. But as a small scale seed producer, I found that there's not a lot of other small scale seed producers that are bothering with biennial crops for seed. So that kind of gives me a little bit of an advantage sometimes as far as seed sales go. If you want some locally grown turnip seeds, there's not a lot of guys you could turn to. You know what I mean? But I got that because we put the time and effort into doing that. So that's nice. So in the end, like everything else, the hard work pays off. When it's happening, it kind of stinks, to have to do it. But in the end, it's always worth it. Just like anything.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about the biennials that you're mentioning. First off, if there's any home growers out there that may not know that term, if you can explain that, what a biennial is, and then which crops you're actually harvesting and the purpose you're treating them like a biennial.
Sure. So a biennial crop requires vernalization, a period of overwintering to produce its seeds. So you can imagine like an annual crop, like you can think about a tomato or something like the lettuce plant. It's going to live its whole life cycle that first year. It's going to produce its edible part. It's going to produce flowers, fruits, seeds. One season, it dies, gone. Biennial crops need to be exposed to a period of cold temperatures in order to trigger their reproductive cycle, right? So they need to stay out in the garden, have this cold weather hit it, and then the next year they're going to flower. So some good examples would be carrots, turnips, parsnips, beets. These are crops that need to be overwintered. And so some of these crops, fennel, parsley is one of them. Some of these crops I can leave in the ground as is, and they can handle the wintertime. Carrots are going to handle the wintertime just fine in the ground. I'll put a layer of mulch down. Parsley, for the most part, can stay out there all winter long. Some crops need to be dug up and brought inside, and it's a whole process. It becomes extra steps to them. Bring them inside, and you pack them in sawdust. And so I've got a refrigerator out here in the pole barn that's full of boxes of root crops packed in sawdust that I will then plant back out in the garden in the spring. That's its own system of organization. But a lot of these crops, that extra maintenance or that extra space or whatever it might be to get it to produce the seed, a lot of gardeners don't have time for that, or they don't want to spend the time doing it. It's as far as seed producers go. A lot of guys, you see a lot of small seed companies that, we're selling things, tomatoes and peppers and beans and things that are easy to maintain and process seeds from. So you don't see as many companies doing that. But for me, it's very important because obviously the seeds that you save from your own garden, they're going to grow better for you than any seed you'll ever buy. They've started to adapt to your microclimate, to your soil conditions, to your pest pressures, they'll adapt to your growing techniques. They'll grow, they'll change to whatever they need to be to survive. So these home saved seeds are the best seeds you're ever going to get. So for me, it's definitely worth those extra steps. But it's not necessarily the case for everybody, which is okay because I'm doing it. So you can buy the seeds for me if you want.
Perfect. I love it.
Yeah, that works.
And it's going to work even better if you're in central Michigan, right?
That's right. Anywhere in the zone, in the Midwest, our seeds seem to do pretty well. And it's really funny because we've brought some seeds from further south and brought them up here and grown them, and they don't quite do as well as that you would want them to because they have to adapt. But within a couple years' time, they quickly come around and they start to thrive, and they do really well for us. And I put a lot of pressure on some of my plants. If we grow melons or something like that, sometimes I don't water them as often as I probably should, or I don't weed them. And so these plants have adapted to that. So you take these seeds home and you coddle them and you give them love, they're going to really respond to it, and you're going to get some great melons out of it. All plants, all that they want to do, the only thing a plant wants to do is make seeds. That is its primary motivator for its entire existence, is seed production. And the only reason things like fruit even exist is as a seed dispersal mechanism. So once we understand that all a plant wants to do is produce seeds, then we know that this plant will do whatever it takes to not only produce these seeds, but to make seeds that will have a better life than it had. It will make seeds designed to thrive in wherever it produced those seeds, right? That's how local adaptation works. That's why you grow the same crop a number of years. If you save your seeds and grow it, that crop will get better and better for you. It will perform better. It'll be healthier. It'll be in every measurable way, that plant will be better because you save those seeds.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit about the difference between the open pollinated heirloom seeds like you're talking about, and then maybe some of the line bred F1 varieties for maybe a production level. And then the challenges, if you're trying to save those seeds, first, what are you going to face? And,
okay.
And what can some home growers kind of experience and see through those nuances of seed?
Okay, we're going to have to unpack a lot of different things here, I think. So first off, let's just define some words real quick for your listeners. When we think of an open pollinated variety that pollinates openly with the plants around it, they will often produce fruits that have seeds that are true to the maternal form, as in you can predict what they grow. I grow Amish paste tomato. I save the seeds, it grows an Amish paste tomato, right? Now an heirloom is just an old open pollinated variety. Typically, after about 50 years of lineage, they'll start to call it an heirloom, which is great. But there's new open pollinated varieties that come out every year, and you can save their seeds and they'll come back true to type and you can predict it. And that's really nice. Now, when we get into an F1 hybrid, those are made when we take two plants of the same species, they cross pollinate them to create that F1 variety. And there's tons of benefits to this, right? There's many, many benefits to the hybridization of crops. That's why they do it. Commercial benefits mostly. Where it gets tricky is when you save the seeds from these hybrids and you try to grow them the next year, because you cannot predict what they're going to grow. Now you can with some. There's going to be some of the maternal line and some of the paternal line and maybe a little long lost cousin thrown in there. But what happens is you don't know exactly what it's going to make. If I save the seeds from a hybrid tomato and I plant them next year, it may not be the same tomato, but it will be a tomato. Okay. So, it may not be as big as the last one, or it might be a different color. There's going to be some variation in it, but it's still a tomato and I can still eat it and it's going to be okay. And the homegrown gardener, sometimes, even if you're dealing with heirlooms, there's chances of cross-pollination happening. So accidental hybridization, right? That can certainly happen, especially if you don't understand the pollination process, so you don't know how to avoid it from happening. You grow a couple pepper varieties next to each other and insects visit them, it's going to cross-pollinate them, right? So your seeds won't come back true to type. Your seeds will be hybrids, right? But they're still peppers. They're still edible. And I think that that's a thing that really throws off new seed savers, is this fear of messing things up. Now, if you're growing a very historic, very important, super sentimental family heirloom, or a squash that George Washington grew or something like that, then you got to be a little bit more particular. But if you're just growing for food production, who cares, really? If your things cross-pollinate, you're still getting fruit, you're still getting food, you're getting things that are working very quickly to adapt to your local climate. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's unpredictable. So if you're a market grower and your customers expect a very particular variety to be for sale on your table, you want to be able to provide that, right? But obviously, there used to be a guy at my farmer's market. He was a guy that sold peppers. He specialized in peppers. And he sold all these different varieties all year. But his best-selling item was a grab bag. It was just a bag of all these random peppers, all different colors and shapes and sizes. That was his best-selling item. And I asked him, I said, "Do you ever save any seeds from any of your peppers?" And he says, no. They could be cross-pollinating. I don't know what's happening out there. And I was like, well, what would happen if they cross-pollinate? He said, well, I'd have a bunch of different peppers of different shapes and sizes and colors, and I wouldn't even know what they would be. But what's your best-selling item? It's a bag full of peppers that's all different shapes and sizes and colors, and nobody knows what it's going to be. And I thought, well, you're working too hard, man. Let your peppers do their thing, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. Again, unless you're dealing with a historic, sentimental heirloom of some sort that you want to preserve.
Right. I think, so often within the F1 varieties, in terms of crop selection, it's going to be yield per plant and disease resistance.
Sure.
To whatever it is. And I think when people are collecting or saving those seeds, those are the first two things that get lost in that next generation, because that's what it was kind of bred for. And oftentimes it gets lost. It's not going to have a resistance to downy mildew, or it's, not actually coming back true to type. It's going to look like the same tomato for the most part. It may have less yields. It may not have as big of a fruit cluster.
Well, one of the things you'll notice right away with the yield is there's this thing called hybrid vigor. So that first year, that F1 hybrid is the most vigorous, right? So you'll almost immediately notice a loss of vigor in the next generation, right? And that's just part of the genetics there. So you're absolutely right that people will see differences in the plant that are not just physical, visual differences. They'll be maybe in the plant's behavior or its disease resistance. And you won't even know that necessarily unless your plants are exposed to that disease, or in that situation comes up, and then you'd be like, oh, this is not ideal, for sure. So there is something to be said for that, especially for new gardeners or market gardeners that have very specific needs, and that's the bottom line they have to keep an eye on. Having seeds that will produce crops that are predictable, there's a lot of benefits to that, most certainly, and as a new gardener, so I always recommend you should grow open pollinated varieties. You should grow things that are going to produce seeds that are true to type, just for that reliability, even if it's just for your own confidence of seeing the success of what you've done. I think that that's important. Predictability is nice, but in some cases, uh, unpredictability can be fun, you know? Um,
Right.
it
Right.
just depends on what your ultimate goal at the end of the day is with the plants that you're growing.
That's what I keep trying to tell my wife is unpredictability,
Yeah.
and it can be fun, right?
Yeah, right. You got to mix it up a little bit. I mean, if you think about nature, nature's
Look,
always hybridizing everything, right? Nature likes to keep it unpredictable for sure. But sometimes, the wife is right, and inside and outside the garden.
well, she can predict exactly where my unpredictability is. And so, yeah, I don't know if that if that makes sense.
That
She knows
counts.
exactly where my piles of clothes are going to be in the floor where
Right.
they shouldn't be.
Right, for sure.
Yeah. So there's something interesting that you talked about here, and it sparked this deeper question within the seeds and true to type and development over time. There's a lot of people right now that are a part of this bigger conversation around nutrient density. Um, is there a potential for nutrient density variance within the types of seed that are planted? Um, or is it all related to the grower's ability to have healthy soil?
That's a good question, dude. You would have to think that there's got to be some sort of traits passed along generationally through these seeds, that the healthiest, most nutrient dense plants are going to produce seeds that are going to try to carry that trait forward. That seems logical to me. I can see that. But ultimately, the soil is going to play a huge role in this. You could take a seed from the greatest plant ever, and if you bring it home and you grow it in poor soil, it's going to impact that seed, no matter how great the previous generation was, right? Soil health is the greatest. You could have the greatest seeds on earth, but if your soil is just dirt, it's not going to get you very far. So that's something that you're right, that everybody should be aware of, the quality of the soil. You could even think of, like, the word terroir, as we described. They use that a lot with grapes, but that can fall into anything. And it's basically the nutrients and mineral contents of a particular soil carries this very interesting and particular flavor over into the grapes or over into the tomatoes. That's why in Italy they're so particular about what tomatoes are grown where, because of the soil itself creates the quality of the tomato that grows. Yeah, so for sure, there's much to be said for that.
Well, it goes back to the internet thing, right? You see these ads and these great documentaries that are all about it's the seed that's being planted, and there's some truth to it. But they show like the little tiny carrot, the one I'm talking about. It's like this little
Yes.
scraggly carrot. It has this much nutrient density compared to this big, crisp, healthy carrot. You know, and my question is, did you test that carrot? Or did you just get a picture of an old carrot and say it has more nutrient density? How do you know? Um, and that's just that question, because it seems so compelling, um, of the argument, and so logical, but it's it may be missing elements there. So that's just my own curiosity and a greater question.
Well,
Now,
I would say, I mean, I'm not going to analyze obviously the carrot to see its nutrient contents, but we could use some other indicators, and we could say maybe through color, or flavor. And I think that the flavor says a lot. You eat a tomato from the
Mhm,
grocery store that is just being grown in dirt somewhere that's being held
mhm.
up by a bunch of chemicals, and you eat it and it's like styrofoam, and then you eat a good tomato and it's that flavor. I think that the flavor comes from the nutritional, the compounds that are in the fruit, right? Produce that flavor. So I think that it's not science, but I think it's pretty close.
Well, I think that is there. I mean, science is observation, with a measurable track record, and so it's
Okay, then
like,
yes, it is science.
that's science. So I look at that and I go, okay, well, the tomato, it's picked early, not at peak ripeness, which means that its nutrient content isn't actually as where it could be. And so you've got that element too, and it's picked early with the ability to ship, and then oftentimes sprayed with ethylene so that it can turn red, um, you know, rather than produce its own ethylene to continue to ripen and turn red. It's kind of a forced measure.
Right.
Um, but I think of, judging fruit quality. There are some great fruit in grocery stores now. About 15 years ago, there wasn't as much.
Sure.
Um, the acceleration of organic practices and regenerative practices as the internet has both spread better information and newer information. Growers are getting better every year. I'd like to think that I'm one of those. I'm hoping to get better at my craft
Right.
every single year.
Of course.
Now I know that the quality of my produce is getting better from what I sell or have brought to market. I also have shifted farms, multiple different times and grown in different regions. And I know that I've got better soil on specific farms than I do in other farms. And it makes a difference. And I know that there's a nutrient impact into the food that I'm being, that's coming out of that ground. So again, I don't know. It's just a conversation of nutrient density may not always be what it seems in the story that you're told, I guess, is the great question from me. I really like where you went with flavor and crispness and like some of those, factors that are aroma.
Yeah, I mean, I can only imagine that when the fruit exemplifies all of its traits at their peak, then there must be something to be said for how it was grown and the soil that it came from and all of those indicators, right? I think there's a lot to be said for how growers now have better information, so they know to treat the soil better. They know how to care for the plants in a way that will produce these more nutrient dense foods. But obviously, it's the market that dictates that. So it's the consumer that wants these products that's going to help push the growers further in that direction. The growers are going to go there, but they're only doing it. I mean, there's a sense of pride. I want to grow the best stuff possible, but ultimately you're going to do it because the consumer is going to respond to it. The consumer is going to choose your vegetables because they're better. You want to grow better stuff. So ultimately, those of us that are shopping at the markets, we decide what kind of things we want to buy. At the end of the day, it's a delicate dance between the two, but you know what I mean, right?
Yeah, totally. As a tomato grower, and pretty decent size production, in the past at different farms, like, if you're growing several thousand tomatoes and that, several thousand tomato plants, an acre or two of tomatoes, and you can grow an old heirloom variety that's a Cherokee Purple that may have amazing flavor, amazing taste, but it's a little uglier, may have some cracks on the top, a little more cut off, and people don't buy it at the market versus, I can grow a 7 or 8 ounce red tomato with no cracks and it just flies off the shelf. What are you going to grow?
Exactly right. You're going to grow what people are going to buy. At the end of the day, it has to be what we choose because we got to pay for all the stuff. We got to stay in business. We got to, so yeah, whoever's buying it, they're going to dictate what we grow. We can try to introduce them to some new things and show them that flavor helps. I've been to a lot of tomato festivals, tomato tastings, where you turn people on to these concepts of try these different tomatoes and see how much better they can be for you. But then you got to be able to follow it up with availability at the market. That's
exactly. And consistency.
Yeah, and consistency. If I have a good tomato at this thing, I buy it from you. I expect it to be just as delicious every time.
Right.
So the
and
consumer
you want it next
can be
week,
fickle,
and the week after, and the week after.
Right.
And it's like there's some seasonality to this. Yeah.
So there's an education compound there too, right? We got to help these people understand you cannot get a delicious tomato in December. Maybe in some places, but not here in Michigan. I know you can't. They'll try to sell you tomatoes all day long, but don't buy them. Don't do it. But it's just, it is what it is. People they don't necessarily know better. When you show somebody their first homegrown tomato and they get to taste it, it's a game changer. That changes your whole life, you know. That then you know better than to buy that grocery store tomato sometimes, because until then, you know, you can't blame them for not knowing any better. But once you've tried it, that's why you got to support your local growers as often as you can, no matter what. They're working hard, they're doing the best they can, and they're producing the tastiest food you're going to get your hands on outside of growing your own, you know?
Right. Right.
Just like me with the
Well,
corn that we talked about at the beginning.
yeah.
I can't grow my corn, but I'm very particular about who I buy it from. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I love it. Well, Bevan, where do people find you, and what's the best place for them to learn more about Small House Farm, what you're doing, and maybe connect and maybe buy some of your beans?
That would be sweet. So we're on all the platforms with the Instagrams and the YouTubes and all the things. But you can find a link to every single thing that we do, the podcast and everything, right through our website, which is smallhousefarm.com.
Very cool. Bevan, thank you so much for taking the time to just have a fun conversation today about your story. And hopefully it's been encouraging to people and inspiring. And, you know, at this time of the release, we're gearing into, you know, probably it's time, folks. Start thinking, start planting. Like, it's going to be the end of February, early March when this releases. So make sure that you are getting seeds if you can. You know, Bevan, you may be sold out by then. I have no idea, depending on your inventory. Hopefully you are, for your sake.
Well, it doesn't hurt to look, folks. So go ahead and check it out.
It doesn't hurt to look.
Case.
Yep. You never know. So, awesome. Bevan, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and just doing what you're doing out there every day, you know, saving seeds and sharing the story and teaching people how to grow their own food. It is a noble mission and a sometimes thankless mission.
Well, I appreciate it, Luke. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks. And thanks for staying tuned all the way to the end. We're so excited that you're here. And that probably means that you enjoyed what you heard. You found some value in it. If you could, go and share this with somebody that you know that really helps push it forward in the algorithm. Hit a like, a subscribe, hit a review. It makes all the difference for us. Thank you for listening to the How I Grow This podcast, and we are dedicated to bringing more of these stories to you to help you grow at the next level. We'll see you.